Thank you everyone for joining us. We're just going to give another minute or so for everyone else to come on into the room. Okay, well, welcome everyone. This webinar is a part of the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts Regional Heritage Stewardship Program. This program is an initiative funded through the National Endowment for the Humanities, pursued in close partnership with the Utah Division of Arts and Museums and Utah Humanities. The RHSP program is an initiative focused on bringing preservation, education, and resources to the Intermountain West region of the United States. This webinar will be recorded and all registrants will receive the link to that recording within a few days. We just ask that you please hold all questions till the end of the presentation, as we will be following it up with a quick Q&A session. And now with that, I pass up today's webinar to the presenter, Randy Williams.
Thank you very much, Leah, and welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Today, this Regional Heritage Stewardship Program webinar is on oral history, essentials, ethics, and community-driven engagement. I also would like to give thanks to partners, including Utah Division of Arts and Museums, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, National Endowment for the Humanities, and Utah Humanities. The goal or goals of today's webinar are to explore the basics of engaging with and following the lead of community scholars to prepare for and host an oral history effort, including ethics, basic know-how, research, question preparation, and archival strategies, which I am calling the essentials. I'm an emeriti faculty at Utah State University, where I worked for 26 years as the Fife Folklore Archives Curator and Oral History Specialist. I continue to work for the university, teaching ethnographic fieldwork or oral history courses for the History and Folklore Program graduate students. I'm also a board member for Utah Humanities and the Cache Refugee and Immigrant Connection. As a faculty member at Utah State University, I am coming to you today from lands that I would like to acknowledge that USU and all in-state USU institutions reside on the original territory of the 8 federally recognized tribes of Utah, including the Confederated Tribes of the Goshute Indians, Navajo Nation, Northwestern Ute Tribe, Northwestern Band of Shoshone, Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah, San Juan Southern Paiute, Skull Valley Band of Goshute, White Mesa Band of the Ute Mountain Ute. Tribes that have been living, working, and residing on this land from time immemorial. We and myself acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this land, and we honor and respect the indigenous peoples still connecting to the land on which I present today. So the idea of our conversation today is about oral history. The Oral History Association, sorry about that. The Oral History Association defines oral history as a field of study and a method of gathering, preserving, and interpreting the voices and memories of people, communities, and participants in past events. Oral history is both the oldest type of historical inquiry, predating written word, and one of the most modern. And as a folklorist, I give honor to the millennia-old tradition of caring for and passing on information through oral tradition. And I'm honored to talk with you about that today. One of the things that I have found throughout my career that I feel like field work, ethnography, oral history, wherever you come into this field, whatever you call it, it adds a face to history and it makes space for excluded voices. In 2006, as the Merrick Library that I was living in the special collections at Utah State, we began to prepare to move to the new library. And I recognized that there were some excluded voices. There were voices that were not included in a very systematic or clear way in the library, and that included the Hispanic community. And so we started with an advisory board to figure out how to make a difference and make excluded voices more included. And a few years later, we did some work with youths from the Latino, Latina, now what we all call Latinx community members. And this is an interview excerpt from Alex, who was a high school student at the time at a school in the southern part of the county that I come from, which is called Cache County. And he illustrates, puts a face to the idea of immigration and some of the complexities. Alex said, well, when my brother got deported, inside I was sad and scared for my brother, worrying about him. But outside, I didn't want anybody to know I was sad. So I just had a fake smile on my face every day. So like I made soccer team, and it was kind of hard because I was thinking about my brother at the same time and I had to focus on soccer. It was kind of hard. That comes from an interview with Eduardo Ortiz, one of my partners in the project. And it does so poignantly help add some historical context for historical events. I would suggest that oral histories have the ability to give power to all voices. The Society of American Archivists core value statements that were created in February 2005, updated in 2012, and again in August of this year, they state, it should be noted that the historical records held within archives often afford the most power to those who create and control the archive itself. In a democratic society, such power should benefit each individual equally. Hence, archivists, and I'm going to suggest we insert oral historians, should ensure that their professional guidelines empower them to equitably provide labor and resources in service of all members of society. SAA also talks a lot about accountability and their best practices and core values. And they talk about maintaining documentary evidence of actions by individuals, groups, and organizations, by preserving records of societal experiences, functions, activities, and decision-making. Archivists provide important resources for contemporary and future entities seeking accountability. Whether it's the public sphere or the private sphere, preserving, and I'm down to this very last sentence, preserving evidentiary records for both public and private entities creates a mechanism to cultivate transparency within organizations and can help make power imbalances visible. And I think that's one of the things that as we work towards working with community partners and looking to what is missing, what voices have been excluded, we can help make power imbalances visible and work to shift that. Throughout my career, I've used language like underheard and underserved. And I wish that I could see all of your faces right now, because I bet some of you would be nodding your head and saying, yeah, I've said that same thing too. But a colleague of mine, he works in the Education Initiative for Utah Humanities. His name is Josh Wintergren. He has suggested the term excluded voices. And so I think if you haven't been invited to the table, people don't know about you and your efforts, then you are excluded and you become invisible. So I love this image in my mind a lot of times about an iceberg, and we've all been told, as this picture represents, that so much of an iceberg is unseen by us. It's below the waterline. And if we were able to dive down, we would see it. So I suggest to all of us that when we do oral history work, we do dive down. We think about, as we prepare for and partner with people, that we think about the parts that aren't seen, like community building, partnering with others, power and representation in our oral history efforts, autonomy and equity, all things that we need to think about before we even begin the project. And then the project planning and who we project plan with and who we give power to in that project planning. If we're partnering with a repository, and the copyright and how we give copyright, and the preparation of questions and knowing all the work that we need to do. And all of the, from metadata to transcription, all of that is really unseen by most people. What most people see is the interview, and they know about that, or the deliverables. They can go to an exhibit and read an excerpt of an interview, or go online and hear the entire interview, or read the transcript, or see photographs from the fieldwork session. So like an iceberg, oral history is, so much of it is really unseen by others, but to do and have a sturdy and stable underpinning, we need to think about those things. So the idea to me of autonomy in the work that we do or want to be doing is working towards making autonomy a big part of our project. And Joanne Evans and her co-authors in their article, Self-Determination and Archival Autonomy, Advocating Activism, in the 2015 journal Archival Science, stated, archival autonomy, and I know I'm talking a lot about archives, and I lived in an archive, but I'm a folklorist and oral historian, ethnographer, and when we do this work, one of the key components is depositing it and making it available. We might use it to begin with for our own project, whether that's in a museum, a library, an arts agency, wherever you're coming from. But the equity and the equitable thing to do is making sure we provide access to others and we deposit it. And so that's why a lot of my conversation will be in the beginning about archival work, but it is archival work of oral histories. So that in mind, archival autonomy is tentatively defined as the ability for individuals and communities to participate in societal memory with their own voice and to become participatory agents in record keeping and archiving for identity, memory, and accountability purposes. The achievement of archival autonomy is identified as a grand societal challenge, with the need for archival activism to become an integral part of societal social movements on a local and global scale. I 100% agree with that quote. And I think creating space through working with community partners and scholars to give autonomy and participate in autonomy is, in my opinion, the way to make the strongest base for the work that we would all be engaging in. The American Folklife Center, the Library of Congress, and their cultural documentation guidelines state the ethical responsibility of professional researchers to the individuals and communities who collaborate with them in the course of a research project, and they're specifically talking about, through ethnography, are central concerns for a number of scholarly organizations. Now, I've stated that I'm a folklorist. I lived in a library. My academic appointment was as an associate librarian. But as a trained folklorist, my home organization is the American Folklore Society, but also as an oral historian, the Oral History Association. Perhaps you're coming from another organization, but here are some incredible positions and principles on ethnographic research, oral history, and inclusion from the American Folklore Society, the Oral History Association, Society of American Archivists, Internal Council of Museums, and this one right here, Oral History in the Digital Age. And I'm going to play a little bit of Doug Boyd preamble about this organization. There are many others, but these are some really ethical, important organizations that help set best practices and help move toward inclusion and autonomy in oral history work. The idea of giving it autonomy, and it's not giving to anybody, it's participating in making space for excluded voices and making sure those partners have autonomy. And it's not just lip service. So community-driven work and power is vital. And to me, the best way to make real change in our archives, museums, community history, oral history programs is to embrace our community scholars docents, guides in our endeavors. To me, this includes from the beginning, from the project concept to the completion through the planning, includes funding and working to get reputable funders and funders who have a vision for this idea of autonomy. Questions, we all know, whether you've been involved in doing oral history work before, or you're just getting started, or you're a pro, you know that drafting the questions is key and vital, a vital tool to this work. Partner with individuals to help do the interviewing. And I'll talk more about that as well as all of these points. Metadata, how you describe the interview so that people can find it, and making sure that we use community scholars and partners to help us with the terminology. What if we're going to do something, making sure our publicity is either in the language, the home language or the first language of the community, as well as English. And making sure we do public programming. I submit without community scholars, uneven positions of power will creep into our oral history work, into our archives, and we won't be making space for excluded voices. Partnerships are amazing and a lot of work. And I think all of us know that when we were students, maybe in high school, junior high, college, and the professor said that there was going to be a group project, there comes some groans because people sometimes just want to do it themselves. They find it easier. And that might be true, but it definitely isn't going to be as robust. And especially in oral history endeavors, having partnerships, especially with the communities that we hope to work within, are vital and key. And I've learned this over my career. I began my career right out of graduate school and started right off the bat interviewing in communities and doing the groundwork, the underneath the waterline groundwork, but not always working so conscientiously or even thinking about working with the community to help build the project. I would work with the community to do the project by being them graciously being interviewed and so forth and vetting their transcript. But as I matured in my profession, I realized that wasn't the right way to go about it. And one of the more recent projects that I did, this is from 2016 and 17, I had the opportunity to partner with individuals involved in the Cache Valley, which is the county I live in, Cache County Drug Court. And I don't want to give a lot of background on some of these projects I'll talk about, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with drug courts started in the 1990s with Janet Reno in Dade County, Florida, and it came out of a need to figure out how to, the court systems, that is, to manage the large cases of crack cocaine arrests, people arrested for crack cocaine use or selling. And I just have to say here, just by the nature of some of these things, there's inequity there because we're in the middle of an opioid quote unquote crisis, and it definitely is a crisis. And I've just finished up a project with that as well. But there is some inequity there, and I just need to make note about that between what happened in the 90s and what's happening now, and people getting different kinds of treatment. Well, in May of 2016, a young man named Andrew came in, interacted with me via email, and then he came up to the archives. And he had previously, a year before, in May of 2015, attended an event at the Logan Library in Logan, Utah, northern Utah, that my graduate students that were participating in a Library of Congress ethnographic field project, my partner Lisa Gabbard, a folklorist at USU, and myself and two of our colleagues from the Library of Congress at the American Folklore Center, Guhar Shankar and Maggie Cruzy, our students worked within with community partners to interview and preserve the story of three refugee communities, the Eritrean, the Rohingya or the Burmese Muslim, and the Korean community members. And it was a really impactful and amazing fieldwork project that had a lot of partnering. But we did an event at the Logan Library and invited the community to come and learn from our students, but also from the community about their voices. And at that event, this young man, Andrew, came and participated. And a year later, after thinking about this, he approached me. And as I said, he came to the library where I worked at the USU and asked if maybe the library might be interested in hosting and participating somehow with participants in drug court to tell their story. He saw some real parallels between the work that we did with the refugee community to tell their story and help make a face seen in a way that's not stigmatizing. Andrew said in his interview, and obviously we did go ahead and do that project, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. But Andrew said, being on drug court and being a felon and being someone who has been arrested, I did not feel like I had a voice or a medium to express my voice. So there was a lot of hesitation, and I was pretty nervous and pretty scared about approaching you and talking to you. And what he's referencing in his interview that we did about 6 months later from that first time meeting him was have the courage to come to a scary place to him and talk with somebody who he didn't know. But what he did know is he said that I had said something in May of 2015, that part of my charge and my job for the university was to make underheard and excluded voices. And I probably at that time didn't say excluded, but underheard and documented and served voices. Just as a little caveat, when my partner, you can see at the bottom there, Jennifer Duncan and I worked with Andrew and did the work. It took us about 6 months before we did our first interview. But a little bit later, we, in 2017, published an article about the project. No, excuse me, in 2019, we published an article. But in this interview that we did with Andrew, he mentioned that having power to having the autonomy to participate and be part of this project was key, and made his voice and others was very impactful for myself as well. So this idea of partnering with people brings up some things, including the idea of shifting power structures. And working with Andrew, and I've done this throughout my career, you're giving a little bit as a person who has a profession, who knows how to do parts of a job. You might be needing to learn from your partner. And so with this project, when you want to engage in this, you need to be willing to get out of the way. And if you have some fragility or some, we hear people talk about white guilt or fragility, or insert whatever kind of angst that you might have, that needs to, quickly be addressed on your personal level and moved out of the project. We need to work towards employing cultural humility and being willing to be taught and guided and nurtured and with our community partners as well. And I'll use Andrew as an example. He taught me so much. I spent months and months researching and going to drug court every Tuesday at noon and learning and taking my notes back to Andrew and others that were helping from the community to advise and grow. And then Andrew also learned about question preparation, interviewing, and about the nuts and bolts of oral history work. So it was a lot of reciprocity. I needed to recognize also, as you can totally hear and feel from Andrew's quote, there's generational trauma sometimes associated with communities we might need to work with. And we need to recognize that and try to mitigate anything that we might do to add to that trauma. We need to recognize systematic prejudices and imbalances, privileges and triggers that come along, and recognize that safe spaces need to happen, and thinking through all of that. I will make note of that regarding safe spaces in this project, as well as many others. Creating safe spaces for people to be interviewed or to be having exchanges is vital and key. And for this project with the Voices from Drug Court, we determined we would host or hold all of our interviews at the Logan Library, where many of the individuals on drug court are involved in the project, which included people on drug court, those who hosted drug court, from judges, attorneys, bailiffs, and also the people in the mental health professions that were working, and family members. So there's a variety of people that were interviewed in the various stages of drug court. But one day it became apparent that a young couple on drug court were not going to be able to be interviewed except for on Sunday. The Logan Library was closed. We tried to figure out a great place. We needed to control sound. And so we determined to do it at the library at Utah State University. And when the young couple came, the young woman noted to my partner and I doing the interview that day, Jennifer, that she was surprised that they were allowed on campus. And I realized that I had given her a lot of information how to get to campus, and we talked about it, but I never thought to say, do you feel comfortable coming to campus? It just seemed, because of my experience, that was a safe place. And it was an okay safe place for her, but it did cause her to feel a little trepidation. So that brings me to the point, we're gonna make mistakes. I've made many mistakes, but I try not to make the same mistake again, just through continual education. People have more than one community, and so somebody might be on drug court, they might be involved in, a religious organization, they might be part of an ethnic community. So just remember, as Linda Schultz says in her community oral history, where we have been and where we are going in the spring 2015 journal oral history, that people are going to be coming from a variety of spaces and places. So we can't pigeonhole people, and we need to remember that when we're working with community members. There's multiple voices. There's community self-definition and intersectionality. I think I would like to just give you a few ideas before you engage in oral history work. Ask yourself a few questions. Are you reacting to a stated need from a community? Does the group to be interviewed know about your project? Have you worked with the community group member or scholar to create the project policies and procedures? And what is your role? What's your motivation? Can you be objective? How are you going to safeguard? And to me, that means archive or make this information available later on. And how are you going to use and gather this information? How will the community members access it? Will you collect sensitive information? And if yes, how will you safeguard that, mitigate community concerns regarding the sensitive information? Will you engage, if it's applicable, your institution's institutional review board? And are you putting the needs of the community first? Those are key things. They're deep inside the bottom of the iceberg. They are the core of what we need to be doing. But you bring some amazing skills. I'm sure all of us would tick off some of these or many of these. What skills are you bringing? What are we bringing to this effort? Because we do need community partners. That's important, but we are also part of that community team of the oral history endeavor. And so what are we bringing? Interviewing expertise, research expertise. Are we part of that, the group we're going to interview? Are we an insider? Do we have connections to the group? Are we willing to make those connections and keep strong with the groups that we interview? Do we have some technical expertise? Are we a museum or an archive expert? And of course, those soft skills that we shouldn't overlook. People, you're a people person, or you're interested in a really patient listener, calm, trustworthy, punctual, unflappable, passionate. You're a project finisher. Those are key things. And those are key things that help you build community, being trustworthy and having skills that somebody's interested. Andrew was interested in reaching out to me, not because of me as a person, but because he saw that I had some skills that would be necessary to furthering a goal he had. So for some traditionally underrepresented and excluded communities, oral history projects may represent their first exposure to archives. As well, these communities may also be underheard and excluded in public discourse also. So in order to build strong inclusive collections, we must build strong community connections. To me, that is the heart and soul of oral history work, is these community connections, giving autonomy. I'd like to shift, and it's not a shift, but I want to now focus on those essentials that I mentioned in the beginning. We've talked somewhat about ethics and best practices and about community engagement. Now let's figure out and talk about how to do the work. I need to self-disclose that I typically either teach a semester-long course on how to do this work or an all-day workshop. The shortest amount of time I've ever done this has been about 3 hours. So I obviously condensing quite a bit today, but all the information is in these slides and in this PowerPoint and in the hyperlinks that Leah will be sharing. So just please know that all the information that I would share with anyone else is here. And I'm of course available. I'd be happy to take questions at the end and also email So how do you do it? Well, I told you planning, right? And we talked about best practices. We talked about ethics, having high ethics. And we talked about working with community scholars from concept through completion. Let's now kind of go through some of these other pieces and points. Researching your topic thoroughly. And I mentioned when I started working with Andrew and also my partner and colleague at the library, Jennifer Duncan, we did a lot of research, Jennifer and I, not only in journals and books and trying to find out what, the history of government documents about drug courts, but also talking with the judge, doing all the due diligence of learning. But then, as I said, I went to court and I was there for months and months before we did our first interview, building up trust. But researching the topic thoroughly might take 6 months, it might take a year. Then the project planning, is happening during the same kind of time, creating goals and desired outcomes. And this can be stated in your letter of information, which I will show you an example from. I would like to go off and just show you a little bit of one. I'm not going to do any more of this, but embedded are all of these great resources. And I'm going to share this resource with you. A colleague of mine, Doug Boyd, a folklorist, and he is the director of the Louis B. Nunn Oral History Center. And he and others are part of the oral history in the digital age. And this is Doug.
My name is Doug Boyd. I direct the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History at the University of Kentucky Libraries. Oral history in the...
Sorry, folks, I'm not sure what I just did.
Digital Age is a grant-funded project funded by the IMLS to establish best practices for oral history in the digital age. What does that mean? What we've done is we've brought together partners, Michigan State University's Matrix Center, Library of Congress, Smithsonian, the American Folklore Society, the Oral History Association, bringing experts together from a variety of fields to explore what is the best way to collect, to curate, and to distribute oral history with a special emphasis on technology. Oral history really is somewhat unique in the sense that the demographic that it represents is vast. The range of institutions, the range of individuals who do it is incredible. The budgets go from a few dollars all the way up to millions of dollars. And so we're really trying to shape this best practices initiative in a way that it takes on a usefulness for the smallest county historical society all the way up to major foundations who are trying to do major projects. And that's a really strong point of this particular project, I think. Your traditional best practices is usually a document, and it's usually a document prepared by a very small community. And it's usually a document that's prepared for a small community about something extremely specific. And what this is doing is bringing together an enormous community of people who record interviews, who conduct the interviews, the community of curators and preservationists who are in charge of taking care of this material, as well as the folks who are figuring out cool ways to put it online and to get it out to the world. And so that is something that makes this project somewhat unique.
I'm going to stop there, but the reason that I wanted to share the beginning of Doug's YouTube video for the oral history in the digital age is I would like you to, think about going back there and looking at some of the great work people are doing. And he mentioned all the various people who are engaging in this work and all the many, many hands that touch this work. And so I want to tip of the hat to all the partners I've had over the years, those that are the community partners and the dedication and the work, folks like Andrew, but also the people in the library or in the folklore program or at the Library of Congress, or people that I've worked with to do from completion of a concept through completion of a project. And so I hope that you will take advantage of some of these links at your leisure to look and to learn more about the people that are doing this work and follow the lead of the experts. And I have to say, Doug is an expert in this field and does great work, but I know that you will as well. And as we move through this idea of project planning, it's a lot of planning and it is a lot of work to make a project ethical and complete and beautiful. And so the procedures, that you would want to communicate to yourself and others, and also again in the letter of information, is how you're going to do the work. I mentioned the Institutional Review Board, IRB, and again, I will mention you may have to do that. So depending on your hosting institution, you might have to do an IRB determination protocol. Maybe you'll have to do a full protocol. Maybe you don't have to do it at all. Well, one beauty of working with IRB is you get your ducks in a row, get your letter of information, get your procedures. They will give some guidance if they think you're slacking off. Working on interview questions, take your time with this. You've got to have done your research. This is the main tool of the oral history effort. And so working with community scholars or others to create this in an ethical and effective way is vital. And there's a lot out on the internet about creating oral questions from journalism and from the Oral History Association. And I wish we had time to sit and practice doing some of that and practicing it with each other. And that's a great way to do it. If it's a clunky question, when you ask it out loud, then it's a clunky question. And I've written my fair share of clunky questions, but they get refined by practicing. Getting forms ready. Release forms, informed consent, letter of information, questions, checklists, other kinds of things like trauma forms. So this, I'm going to leave the PowerPoint for a second. Excuse me. Well, I'd like to make this bigger, and so I'm going to. This is the release form we use at Utah State University, and it's pretty typical. It was created before I came on the scenes. I revised it quite a bit, working with my colleagues at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress and with Utah State University's legal counsel. And you're welcome to take a gander at it. And if you don't have a release form for your organization, this could be a model you might look at, but there's many out there as well. But definitely have a release form. That's key and vital. And have information about successor technology and all this kind of language. But you'll note here that we do not retain copyright. The individual retains copyright to their life experiences. We do retain the ability to use that information and make it available for pedagogy. And so that's something that we feel real strongly about. Another something that's a really key and important, and this is a letter of consent, informed letter of information to interviewees from a project that I just worked on for the last couple of years. It was informing the national narrative stories of Utah's opioid crisis. And this, you can see, I'll make it a little bigger. It's got all the partners up here. It's also got the purpose, the procedures, exactly how we're going to do this, the risks and benefits, information about confidentiality, the voluntary participation, and about withdrawing. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second and talk about power imbalances. I don't know, I don't feel powerful. I feel just like a regular person, but because I might have a Utah State University at the end of my signature when I'm doing this work, as you can see right here with my email, people might think something differently about me than I think about myself or about you, because you're coming from a museum or university or a historical society. And so you've got to recognize these power imbalances. And so you've got to allow people to recognize they can withdraw at no cost. They should never feel pressured to participate. They need to know about if there is compensation and about, I love one thing I do love about IRB involvement is the individuals that we are talking with can maybe visit with somebody that's not these people that are just kind of bystanders, if you will. So this is an important form, and this is a lot of work to get ready. It's not just something you do in an afternoon. So again, be thinking about what's below the iceberg. So another form or another something you've got to get together is your questions. I typically tell folks, my students, and I will recommend to you, try to keep it around 10 if you're going to do a 1.5 hour interview. If you're going to be interviewing somebody, 2 or 3 or 4 times, well, you might have a lot more questions. You might have some follow-ups, and this because we were interviewing people about opioids, they might be coming into their knowledge or their experience with opioids from a variety of places. Maybe they themselves have had experience with opioids, maybe their loved one, maybe they are a health professional, and so the questions were, created depending on who the person might be. So questions and having them available and having them available to the interviewees, the persons you're going to interview, your informant, your partner, before you show up at their house. Something I recommend, and it's really great, is to have an interview checklist. What are you going to do before the interview? Check, check, check. What are you going to do at the start of the interview? What are you going to do after the interview? And we'll be talking about these things, but it's nice to have it with you and move through that. Another thing that I recommend is, I'm going to now get back to our slideshow. There we go. Is I recommend that you have other kinds of forms. So for the opioid project, we had trauma-informed interview reminders. That would be specific to that project. Perhaps you might have something specific to your project. So these are just some ideas. Excuse me. I'm gonna go back to that for a second, make sure I've covered them all. Okay, so those are some of the forms or some of the papers that you might give to somebody. Before you start out, so we talked about research and planning and ethics and partnering, and this is before the interview, before you actually start doing the work. These are things you do, preparing. So you need to know what kind of equipment you need. You need some kind of way to record it. And maybe you're going to use an audio recorder. I started my career in the early 90s using a Marantz cassette recorder. My predecessors in the archive and in my field used reel-to-reel recorders and wax cylinders and a variety of other means, including something called a recordio. And it looks like an old-fashioned big old record player that maybe your grandparents might have. It's almost like a little suitcase. And you used an acetate disc and you put it on and the sound was picked up and engraved from the inside of the record to the outside. I have examples of that in the Fife Folklore Archives that I managed. Perhaps you want to do a video and you're going to need a tripod. I've got a link right here to an audio. I think it's a Doug Boyd actually, that he's talking about a Tascam. Look online, choose whatever equipment you're going to get. And if we were meeting face to face, I would bring out a Tascam and a Marantz and let you look at audio recording and kind of fiddle around with it. But you may have your own recording equipment. But be sure you know how to use it. Practice, practice, practice. Did I mention practice? Practice before you get into the field. A microphone is a must. Do not, if you can help it, if your finances allow, do not use the internal microphone in your recording device. Get a good mic. So a shotgun or a stand mic is great. A boom mic is good. My preference is the lavalier mic. It's easy to use, and depending on how you set up your configuration during the interview, the sound is picked up by the interviewer as well as the person being interviewed that is wearing the lavalier. Because I do a lot of ethnographic field work and research, with the oral histories of the interviews, I like a camera, I like to document. I did a lot of work with ranch families, and so documenting the ranch and some of the techniques and tools is vital, and it helps augment the oral history as well. And I'll talk about this in a minute. If somebody's talking to you about some object in the oral history, you want to take a picture of it and insert it in the transcript if possible. The boring kinds of things like cords and batteries, make sure you have them, memory cards. And just remember, microphones often need batteries, so make sure that you've got spares. I typically like to plug in if I'm at a home or someplace that has electricity. I've also interviewed in tax sheds and stalls, and I've interviewed out in the field where I needed a battery. I like to have a lot of batteries. I recommend a headphone, a transcription pedal, and water. If you're at somebody's home, and I don't know if you guys can see me, I think there's a little thing, have some water, bring your own water. And if you're going to be to somebody's home, ask if you can get a couple glasses of water for them. If I'm out in the field, I just keep I know it's not very green, but I keep some bottled water in my vehicle when I'm doing interviews so I can give that to somebody, because we get thirsty, and that's just conscientious as an interviewer to make sure you help mitigate somebody's needs. Setting up the interview, you've done your work, you've researched and you've done everything that you can. Okay, you're going to start figuring out the interview. So you've contacted, you made initial contact with the interviewee, the person, I call them interviewee. Other people have different names for them, but you've contacted the person you're going to interview. And you've done this because you've worked with a community scholar to identify people to interview. You've worked within the community. And there's a lot of cool things about this work, and it's kind of like a snowball effect. It might be that you and your community scholar identify a few people and they're gatekeepers, or during the interview, somebody gives you an idea and a few other names. So there's a lot of ways of doing this, but you've got to make initial contact with those folks. And I like to do it by phone, but sometimes you might do it by a letter or email. And while I'm talking with them, I gather information about them, their address, their email, etc. Maybe if I'm going to go out to their ranch or I'm going to meet them somewhere during the interview, maybe there's some specific instructions in getting there. I try to get a lot of that information and a little bit about them that maybe I didn't know that would help me as I'm preparing and thinking about the interview. Setting up the interview time and place. And I will just say, make safety your first protocol for yourself and for them. Make sure you're going to safe environments. I mentioned with the Voices from Drug Court, we interviewed mainly at the Logan Library. Sometimes, and I have gone to folks' homes with partners, but there have been times in my career I did interview alone, and I would recommend that you do not do that. Make sure your interview location is convenient to the interviewee, whether it's their home, the library. And this day of COVID, we may be using Skype more and Zoom. And I have done Skype interviews before, and they work fine. It takes a minute to get the recording going. But just like Leah said, this webinar is being recorded, and we could send this to a transcriptionist, and that person or ourselves could transcribe it. All we need is some audio. And so during COVID, we can continue to do interviewing if we desire. As I said, do not, if you can help it, interview alone. It's great to have somebody with you. They can maybe be the photographer, or they can be the recordist, the person running the equipment. And just remember, sometimes you might need an interpreter to be with you, and that might be a cultural interpreter. That might also be a language interpreter. Tell somebody where you're going. Be sure before you show up at somebody's house, they actually saw that letter of information, that release form and the questions. That's really courteous. Just think about it. I'm 59 years old. And if someone called me up and they said, hey, we've heard that you are a champion grandma, we want to interview you. And we'd like to come to your home on this day and time. And this is for this project. And they give me all this information, and I'm trying to write things down, or maybe I don't have a pen or paper, and maybe they have to call me back later. But nonetheless, I don't get all the specifics, and I might be wondering, what were those people? I know they're coming to my house next week, and they're going to bring some recording equipment. Gosh, I wish I knew more about it. Well, what if they said, we're going to send you an email or a letter, or we're going to drop by your house and put in your mailbox some information? Great. So those forms that I talked about earlier are important for those folks we're going to interview to have in their hands before we start the interviewing. Practice. I know I've mentioned that once before. Practice doing it. You can see this picture. This is my mentor, Barry Tolkien, and I interviewed him over the course of about a month, probably 3 or 4 times, about his experiences, his life history, but mainly about being one of the preeminent folklorists in the country before his passing. This is my favorite way to interview, kitty corner. You can see, I'm going to come out of, make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. There's the lavalier mic, and I like this placement. Don't put it underneath their chin. Don't put it on their collar. If they turn their head, you're going to get the head turn noise. You're also going to lose some sound or get way loud sound. The trough of the chin is a sound barrier, so if you put it too close, it's going to be a little bit garbled. So put it just down about the third button down. Here's my little Marantz. Here I am with my headphones taking notes. I can look at him, he can look at me, and I am picked up by this microphone. Key and important. So figure out how you like to interview. Maybe that style doesn't work for you. Maybe you like to be across the table from somebody. But you got to be fairly close, right? Because you got to read their body language and they got to read yours. Practice setting it up. Practice setting up your equipment and know where everything goes. So you know how to set up your equipment, you've got your recorder, you've got your mic, and just something to think about is a pop filter for your microphone. If you're not familiar with that, that's like a little foam encasement that goes over your mic, or it comes in front of the mic. And you might have seen them on, in shows, or maybe you're familiar with them. But anyway, that's something to invest in, and it really helps mitigate for pops and smacks into the microphone. When I get to someone's home and I'm there, hello, first time meeting them perhaps in person or via Zoom or Skype, one of the things I will say that I need to set up the equipment, I might ask them, where would you like the interview to take place? And I'm like, often will say to me, well, what's most convenient? I said, well, could we use your dining room table? Or, can we, this is the configuration I would like. If they ask, tell them. If they don't have an opinion, say, well, this really works well. I'm really interested in getting great sound and I want to maximize my time with you. And I appreciate you taking the time to allow me to come in today. And so I want to do a great job and communicate what would work best. During the time of me setting up the equipment, because I practice and I know how to do it, I can also kind of talk for a minute and I'll say, hey, I'm going to give you these forms, especially the release form. I'm not going to ask you to sign it until we're completed the interview, but maybe you'd like to look at it again. And then I ask them to put the microphone on, or I've used mic stand, so setting that up. And again, here's another picture of a configuration. There's the placement of the lavalier. I've asked people to take up jewelry before. They don't care. Do a sound check, making sure with those headphones, they hear what the machine's hearing. And just FYI, many microphones have on-off switches. Make sure you turn it on. Test for sound. You want to record pretty hot, but not so hot that you're getting any, that's arcing into the red. And I record on a WAV file on my audio recorder. Just use the most robust source for video audio. And explain what you're doing. Model for them everything you're doing. Explain, I'm going to be setting up this machine. I'm going to do a sound check. And during the interview, I'm actually going to be taking some notes. And you saw that back here, right? You saw, there's my notepad. I'm working, I'm interviewing, and I'm taking notes. Tell them that I'm going to do that. I also tell them I'm going to check my machine levels periodically. Please don't think I'm not paying attention. And I might even say I'm going to check my phone occasionally, although frankly, my recorder keeps track because the time is there all along. I just want to make sure that if I said I was going to be at their home an hour and a half, I don't stay 3 hours. And so I'm going to let them know that I'm going to check on these things. If you can, mitigate for external noises, but don't stress yourself. So, if somebody, all of a sudden the lawnmower starts up, and if it's their husband or their child, maybe you could ask them, do you mind if they go to the backyard when we're interviewing, or could they do that in an hour? If there's something super loud, ask them maybe if they would mind silencing something. But at the same time, you don't want to stress someone out. My good friend Elaine Thatcher, who's a folklorist and ethnographer, she said that in an interview she did years ago, the individual had a really loud fan, And it was in the middle of the summer in a very hot place. And so she's like, do you mind if we turn that fan off? And she said, that was a big mistake. I should have had some noise on the recording, that both of us cooking and being so hot, we almost got distracted by our rising temperatures. So, don't stress. Stress, keeping low is better than a little bit of problem with sound. Be sure you tag your interview. Hi, this is Randy Williams. It's the 28th of October, 2020. I am interviewing Elvis Presley today at Graceland, and also with us is Lisa Marie Presley. We're talking about what it's like to be a megastar. I really appreciate you being willing to sit down with me today. You saw the release form, you saw the questions. Are you okay to start? Sure. It's as simple as it needs to be, but just make sure you tag it and give as much information. I don't know if any of you out there are archivists or curators or museum folks, but I bet in your career, you've run across a document or an interview that has not a tag on it and you don't know who the people are. Oh, so sad. And it takes a lot of time to figure that out. And it could have been mitigated by somebody doing a tag at the beginning of the interview or on the document. As I said, explain about notes, and these are the kinds of things. I just want to say about this bottom one, you can probably figure out why you take notes, but if you promise to do something, write it down and then do it. Don't give a black eye to yourself or your project because you don't follow through. I know I'm going pretty fast, but I again know that you can come back to these slides and know that there's just so much work in these fine points, and I'll try to point out the most important. There's a lot of interview styles out there, right? And so when you create the questions, that really helps you. So I just say use open-ended questions. They usually begin with why, how, tell me about, describe, or what. What are some memories from your childhood? Avoid questions that someone can answer with a yes or a no. Use direct questions and really try hard to avoid using leading questions. A leading question would be something like, how much will the price of beef go up next year? That question infers that the price of beef will go up. Better, a non-leading. Do you think the price of beef will go up next year? Remember, your personal experiences and attitudes may be tempting to add during the interview process, but this interview is not about you. So I always say to my students and to myself, check your ego and opinions at the door. Use your body. Your body is a tool, and use it to try to give nonverbal responses. Remember, at the end of this interview, especially those of you that are depositing your interviews, Archive wants a transcript too. And so you or somebody else are going to have to transcribe it. And every time you speak, that has to be transcribed. So instead of trying to let somebody know you're listening, because in our speech, when we're talking to people, we say, or I see, or oh yeah, or okay. Try not to do that. Speak only when you're asking for clarification, or you're asking a new question, or they've asked you a question. The rest of the time, try to use your body. Use a smile, lean in, encourage, use your hands. I mean, there's a lot of ways to convey interest and asking a person to continue on with your body as opposed to your voice. And at all costs, do not look bored. And I'm sure maybe you're not bored, but excessive watch checking, arms folding, slouching does not convey, hey, I am interested in you. We're there at they're being gracious to allow us into their life. Use that, treat that really gratefully, graciously, make them feel important because they are important. So be attentive to their facial and body expressions. If they seem uncomfortable, they probably are. And you may need to move away from a question, or even say, I'm going to pause the recorder for a minute and see if they're feeling okay. Maybe they need to go to the bathroom. Maybe they're anxious because they are expecting a phone call and they forgot about it. Just, find out why they are seeming uncomfortable. This is key. Allow for silences in the interview. Just remember, you've asked somebody a question, even if they've seen that question, even if they read it, reading it, and maybe they thought about what they're going to say to you, but then when it comes down to it, they've got inner dialogue. Maybe they're trying to recall a difficult memory and how much of that memory they want to share. Maybe they can't remember all the details and they're thinking for a minute. They're working to recall some specifics. So don't rush a person, give them a minute. They usually will start talking, or they might say, I'm going to pass on that one. And after, 15, 20, 30 seconds, a minute, of course, probably more than before a minute, but you're going to maybe say something, but try to just let them have their time to think. Again, be aware of sensitive topics. And if something comes up that they start to get verklempt or they become emotional, pause the machine and ask them if they would like to go on, if they would like to take a break, if they would like to just stop this line of inquiry. This is a no-brainer, just being courteous, the kinds of things that you would want someone to do to you. Another no-brainer is do not secretly record. I can't imagine anybody doing this. Do not do it. Don't sabotage your career, your good name. Don't offend somebody. This is just really verboten. One thing I do suggest is if somebody asks you to turn off the recorder, pause it. Especially those of us that are using digital recorders, it's nice not to have to splice together interviews. So just pause and then unpause and practice doing that. And you'll make mistakes. I often have 2 or 3 or 4 files that have to be spliced together. Not a big deal, but it's nice if you don't have to do it. When you're doing interviewing for yourself and others, think about self-care. One time I was working for the Central Utah Conservancy District. I did a little bit under 100 interviews for them that went into a book that some of my colleagues wrote, the Central Utah Project. And I did 5 interviews in one day, which is a lot. And those of you that have done a couple probably can recognize. And I had to travel in between a few. It was in the same vicinity, maybe 20 or 30 miles between a few. And so a couple, I think I did 3 at one spot, and then I did 2 that were about 40 miles apart. And so that was a long day. And I had a migraine at the end. I was exhausted, and I just was looping through all the things I didn't do right. Self-care. This work is really a passion piece and can be amazing, but it also can be stressful. So give yourself self-care, and also the people that you're working with, and having lists of things. And the letter of information talks about having resources available, especially when you're working with populations that might have some trauma involved in the line of inquiry. And so have something that you can give them about self-care, and also resources if they do feel triggered with the drug court, and also with the opioid project, and also with a variety of the projects I've worked on. When you're working with excluded voices, being excluded is hard. And so just have some mental health resources available. You're finishing up your interview. Be sure to conclude the interview. Thank the interviewee. At the very end, on tape, I do ask if the interviewee is still comfortable participating in the project and sign the release form, which would allow us to get it transcribed. And as soon as they say yes, and thank yous all around, then I turn the machine off with a tagline. This is Randy Williams. Again, this is the 28th of October, 2020. I have been with Mr. Elvis Presley and his daughter at Graceland, and I really appreciate you taking the time today. Are you still comfortable, Elvis, to sign the release form? Yes, I am. Sorry, I can't do accents or voices. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to turn this machine off. The reason I say I'm going to turn this machine off is I want them to know I'm done recording. If they, want to start talking off the cuff, they can. I don't want to then keep the recording going. They need to know, they need to see me turn on, turn off, pause. That's vital and key. If it's appropriate and they've agreed, photograph, get a headshot. I recommend that highly. Choose a great background and learn how to use a camera a little bit if you're going to do this work. Nobody likes a bad picture of themselves. And if, maybe if you have somebody there with you, have them record, take some photographs of the recording session of you being interviewed. Here's I love this picture of the interviewer having the interview sign the release form, and there's a picture of it. And this is part of our Cache Valley Refugee Oral History Project. So with the ranch project and many other projects, did a really cool, fun project with students up at the Triangle X Ranch in Teton Valley a couple of years ago for a Library of Congress, USU, and University of Wyoming Field School. Oh my goodness, the photographs that we got, our students did about the ranch and the equipment and the horses, beautiful stuff. And so when somebody's talking about some of the ranch, it's nice to have photographs that they can look at. When someone's talking about the history, the past generations, to have snapshots of, photographs of snapshots in the home. Explain what's going to happen next. Like there's going to be some transcription. And that's my sweet husband telling me I got to wrap it up. You're going to explain what's going to happen next. So, I mentioned to them that you're going to have the interview transcribed. You're going to send it to them for review. I usually call it vetting. And I also asked them, are there any, if you were going to try to find this interview, what kind of words would you use to search? Get some metadata terms from the interviewee. Explain to them that, you're going to make those desired changes to the transcript, and that you will give them a final transcript, and that the final transcript will be deposited at, in my case, Utah State University, made available in a digital collection and an EAD, an encoded archival described collection, for themselves, their family members, and researchers to access. I think I missed saying that they could use a pseudonym, and of course, people have, and many of my interviews use pseudonyms, but make sure they're comfortable with all elements of this. Again, you get out, you're finished, you leave, you make sure you have all your equipment. Here's a little trick. Put everything back in your recording case. I have a little teeny little backpack that I carry my small Marantz and my cords and my headphones and my microphone and my pop filter and batteries in. I put everything every time away in the same exact place. Remember that and try to do that, because then it allows you to methodically put everything away and make sure you didn't leave a cord, make sure you didn't leave your mic or the pop filter. You've got everything. Then when you get to your car, check your bag again. It's so easy to go knock on a door and say, oh shoot, I forgot my this, that, or the other, as opposed to you forgot where it is and now you're at someone else's house and you're getting ready to do an interview and you don't have all your equipment. So when you get out to your car or get back to your hotel, your office, or wherever your home, download the interview and save it using a naming protocol. Download your photographs, save it using a naming protocol. And if you can, create with a spreadsheet some metadata for that. And the metadata can include who, where, what, why, when, and some terms. I also like to make a spreadsheet flow chart that gives basic information like the name of the person, their address, phone, how the interview went, and the processes. Okay, I contacted them on this date. They said that I can come. Did the interview, check. I downloaded the interview on this date. It's saved here. I've sent it to the transcriptionist. I got it back on this date. I reviewed it. I sent it to the interviewee for review via. They want to do it online, and if they can do it in a Word doc online or on their computer, that saves you a lot of time. But if they want you to mail it to them, great, mail it to them. Then you're going to have to manually enter their changes. Hey, that's a lot of work. So if you're doing this for hire, add that into your price line. That work, it could take you 3 or 4 hours if somebody has a lot of changes. But to that end, let people know they don't speak like they write, and so you're not asking them to edit it for grammar, just for clarity and for spelling of tools, names, places, etc. I like to send an email follow-up or a letter follow-up to say thank you for the interview. You can expect your transcript in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, and make sure that they know that I appreciate them. Just know if you're going to be doing this transcription, it takes a lot of time. I saw somebody recently say that it takes about 2 to 3 hours for an hour of transcription. Wow, that's like for a transcriptionist. That's not for like people that don't do it all the time. And I've done a lot of transcription. It still takes me several hours, at least 4 to do 1 hour. If you're hiring a transcriptionist, make sure they're ethical. Yes, people are releasing this information, but until they have vetted it and they have said to you, this is the interview the way I like it. I don't want to know, I don't want to be talking about it at dinner with my family. I don't want to know that the transcriptionist has been talking about it at a cocktail party. So you need to be ethical. The people that you hire need to be ethical. Your student workers, your partners, everybody needs to be ethical and treat this as very private. If you have any questions when you're going through your transcript, here's a little trick I use. I put the questions in brackets in the transcript and allow folks to add, answer that question. And then I keep their answer in brackets. And then I note up in the notes field of a transcript, and I'm going to show you an example of one that's happened. When you send the transcript to the interviewee, make sure that you get the preferred way, as I said, how they want to do that. And if they are computer savvy, highly encourage them again to do it online. The rest of these things we've kind of talked about, but one of the things you may need to schedule a follow-up interview. Do so. Be sure you give them whatever you promise. Back in the day, I used to always send the printed transcript and a CD of the interview audio. Well, now all of these, my projects go up on USU's digital collection, so they can, I send them a link, but sometimes people I actually want the audio. So I'll send them a big file transfer that they can download the audio to their own computer. And then I do email them the finished transcript. If they want it printed or they want a CD, I do that as well. The last and very important thing with the materials, the deliverables, is make sure you deposit in a reputable repository that uses good metadata. Here's an example of a transcript, and this is pretty basic. Give the title of the project, who is being interviewed, where, when, who's doing it, what kind of equipment you used, who's transcribing it and proofing it. Usually there would be the name of the interviewee also, and when they they vetted it. Marge and Gary opted not to make any changes. Brief, what's in this, kind of like alerting the person coming to it whether they're talking about the references, and that's for down here, and then noting, and at the end, all additions to transcript noted in brackets. And then I recommend keeping the transcript as it flows. I know some people move things around. Oh, they talked about their grandson up here, and then down below I'm going to move that so it's all together. I never do that. I think that's very odd, but some people do. I also know that some people transcribe every single thing said. Well, I do that too. But if somebody said, yeah, I was getting ready to go to the military. I was getting ready to go to the military and this happened. I'll omit the first time they said that. I will omit sometimes ums and ahs, knowing that people will feel more comfortable reading their transcript, but I don't omit pretty much anything else, but I note that above. So interjections during pauses or transitions in dialogue, such as ahs and starts and stops in conversation, are not included in the transcript. Just be transparent what you're going to do. So preservation is key. So working with a reputable archive is important. If you're not a repository, before your work begins, come to some agreement with reputable archives, libraries, special collections, museums, etc., to house the transcripts and audio. Your home's not safe. You know what? In a shoebox, it's going to get lost. So don't ask somebody to do a lot of work and be involved in this and A, not transcribe it, and A, not deposit it. Please, if you're going to engage in this work, do it to the finest degree possible. And if you with an archive, they can back those things up and make them continually available long past our lifetimes. So what these project deliverables are is the interview audio or video files that you've named, transcript that you've named, and by name I mean in the digital audio file, not just like Bob interview. Get a controlled vocabulary, the release form, and images files. So working with the repository, coming up with a naming protocol. And remember, access language is important, but just remember, in the Library of Congress's subject headings, there's still some racist, homophobic, sexist terms, and they're being slowly removed. But working with the community for descriptive terms is really helpful. Here's an example of a naming protocol for the transcript. And the information at the bottom gives you an idea of what the why and the what for. But here, SCA, Special Collections and Archives, where I, USU Special Collections and Archives Folk, I manage the 5 Folk archives, so that's part of my collection. 029A is the collection number. Here's the interviewee's name, last, first initial, middle initial, excuse me. This is the interviewer's initials. This is the date it was done. Now in the archival world, you do you do year, month, and date. So this was the August 10th, 2017, underscore what it is. It's a transcript. And of course, this comes along with the document. Same exact thing, underscore audio is that's the WAV file. Same exact thing, except for this is a photograph, and you can tell because it's a TIFF file. Don't use JPEGs. Do everything the most robust. And so that's what I mean by naming protocols. Get one. This is what we use at Utah State. You might come up with something else, but it's really great if you use the same one. You have to modify things, obviously, the project number, the names, the dates, but if you use the same naming protocol and you do it the second you get back to your hotel, your office, your dorm, your workplace, your home, wherever, the better. Okay, just going to wrap up a few more slides and then we'll have time for questions. If you're going to go to all this work, communicate it to the public. Let them know that it's available. Host a community event. I mentioned, that Andrew came to the community event we did for the refugee project, Voices from Cache Valley's refugee community. This is the program that we did a year later. So in May of 2015, my students and I and community scholars presented at the Logan Library, an event about refugee voices. A year later, in May of 2016, Andrew came and visited with me. In May of 2017, we presented the project that was Andrew's brainchild to the community. And it was pretty special. We got a lot of write-up in the newspaper, and it was very empowering to the community. And we were able to open up dialogues about stigma. So at the conclusion of a project, host something, whether it's a community event or an exhibit. More recently, especially with the opioid project, we've been doing community conversations online. And just a couple of ideas. If you're going to ask people to partner with you, because this is part of your work and your world, maybe start thinking about ways you can partner with them and continue to be an advocate and an ally. So for 2 years, I've facilitated a recovery book group that grew out of some of the needs of the folks we interviewed and wanting a little bit of some different kinds of things. And you'll notice right here, attendance will count for 1 AA or NA for drug court participants. And that just means that they're getting something out of it. They're getting to count this for something towards drug court graduation. These are a few of my recent publications on this topic that we've been talking about today, specifically regarding equity and bringing excluded communities into the archives, community-based oral history work, social justice in the archives, and improving cultural heritage collections metadata. I would just like to say my hopes for this webinar takeaways would include value the importance of community-driven and or informed oral history engagement, strong commitment to ethics, and confidence in essentials, being able to feel confident in engaging in best practices and knowing where you can find them, and recognizing all the facets of this work, including those things that are below the waterline that you might not think about, but need to be in place before you start a project. Here are some resources of webography and bibliography. So in conclusion, thank you very much for sticking with me for this hour and almost 20 minutes. I want to just reiterate, excellent oral history endeavors begin with thoughtful preparation, impeccable ethics, and community partners. When engaging in this work, it is imperative to be honest and principled. No trespassing on culture. The people that we work with are the most important, not the products that we create. And of course, if we're doing this work ethically, the products will be ethical and amazing too, but people are more important than projects. So to this end, I recommend that you find an expert mentor and then work with insightful community partners. Thank you very much. I am going to come back to you now. And I'm happy to, oops, there we go. There I am. Okay, I'm really happy to take any of your questions, and I know that Leah will help me with that. So thank you very much. So Michael, to answer your question, yes, the presentation will be available probably in a day or so, and Leah might communicate more about that. Oh, super. Christina asks, have you used web services to transcribe? I have usually used a transcriptionist. I have had a few students who've tried a variety of formats, including things like Amazon Web Services. And almost always because I'm always a little skeptical, and they always come back and they're like, you were right, because there's so many voices, it becomes impossible. I would be happy to know if other people, have had success. I just really haven't. And so hiring a transcriptionist or doing it myself seems easier than using a device and then having to go through and revise it and check it out. It just seems like it's a wash. Another question is, if a participant requests an edit or removal of the transcript, should that also be removed from the audio? Great question, Andrea. Yes and no. So a lot of times somebody will make some edits to their transcript, and I mentioned this will be edited to the transcript only. And so we make note at the beginning of the transcript that we, or even in the transcript, if someone takes a bunch of stuff out, if we're just taking some ums and ahs or just a little sentence here or there, I don't even make note of that, to tell you the truth, but I keep it all in the audio. But if somebody takes out a paragraph, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs, in brackets, I will note, per the wishes of the interviewee, this information has been withdrawn. And unless they specifically ask it to be removed from the audio, and we have a conversation about that, I don't do it. I have done it in the past. Whatever they ask for is what I do. Is a consent form or a deed of gift, are they both? No, they're not the same thing. A consent form is consenting that they will allow you. It's a release form. It's releasing and consenting to participate in the interview. If they are going to give you so typically we use that as to bring that into the archive. There are different entities, but for our project and all intents and purposes at Utah State, we don't ask a person to do a deed for that, but it does act like a deed, but they're not the same kind of document. So I guess I should say a deed and a release form aren't the same documents, but a release form can act as a person deeding that, giving that to you. We don't use both at USU. We do use deed of gift for everything else, but we just allow the release form. Do you typically create closed captions for video-based oral histories? I don't do video-based oral histories. I only do audio. And so I know that some people do. And you may go back and look at some of the videos that Doug Boyd and others have done about videography, and they can guide you on closed captioning. And I think that would be really key, because one of the most important pieces that I may not have overt or said out loud, but it's underpinning everything, is access. That's why you want to get it to an archive, making it accessible. And an archive is going to make accessible through a variety of readers to make everything available to people with hearing and visual impairments. And so I would say, if you're going to do videography, you should be doing closed captioning. All registrants, okay, that's coming from Leah. All registrants will receive a link to the recording within a few days. And I'm happy for that to also include the PowerPoint if you want to go back through it on your own or whatever you need. Excuse me. Thank you all for nice comments. Okay, good question from Ruth. Do you keep a raw version and an edited version? No, and let me tell you why. we grappled with this with a lot of things in special collections, and not just with the oral histories, but also we are the repository from some societies, and some of those societies have journals. And some of you in the archive world might have different opinions, excuse me, but just think about this, right? Do you want something, you've gone to the effort of creating a journal article, and it's gone through all these processes. Do you want them to see all the processes? You've gone through the interview process. Do you want someone to see all the ways you edited and changed this? I would submit that most people would not. And so we've opted to show the version that is vetted and signed off on. So we do not keep the raw versions. I have the raw versions. I should say had, because I'm retired now, but for years and years I kept in my cubicle as I was working through, well, not years and years, but the entire time, a year, 18 months I was working on a project, I would keep all the documentation. And then eventually, and I think in one project I did keep all of the versions of it until we made a distinction that that wasn't the way our archive was going to go. So I don't keep them anymore. Ruth is saying, I'm an art conservator, maybe because I do art to interview is different. So I'm not quite, oh wait. Let's see, did you share your contact info? Oh, I will give you my email. My email is Randy, R-A-N-D-Y .Williams @USU, that stands for Utah State University, .edu. And I thank you very much, Andrea. I'm not quite sure what you're asking, Ruth. I am an art conservator, maybe because I do artist interview is different. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but totally shoot me another email so I can answer that. Leah, do you see any interview questions that I haven't answered?
No, I'm not seeing anything.
And I think I have really enjoyed preparing this. This is based off of my teaching in the classroom. I just would, in conclusion, just like to say, I'm really excited for the projects that you do and hope that you feel a little bit more, whatever you came for today, I hope that you walk away getting that. And if you didn't, please email me. I'd love to have more of a conversation. I think that as we make access for excluded and hidden voices, whether that's in wherever that might be, it really does help make social justice and equity. And I'm really passionate about that. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to present to you today. Oh, thank you, Leah. There's my email. Leah, yeah, I guess I could have typed it in there, folks. I'm just. Thank you, Katrina. Thank you all for your nice things. I hope you're all safe and healthy and doing well. I'll stay on for a few more minutes if somebody has any more questions. We have 2 more minutes. I'm proud of myself. I don't like keeping people over the time that I say. And speaking of oral history, if you tell somebody you're going to stay an hour and a half, be out of their house in an hour and a half.
And I would just like to give one quick little plug for our next RHSP webinar. It's going to be with Sabrina Sanders, who's with the Utah Division of State History. She's going to be presenting on conducting an inventory. And that webinar will be on November 20th at 11 Mountain Time.
Well, I would like to give a shout out to Leah and Anastasia for all their back-end help on this. Well, we are now almost at 1:30. If there aren't any more questions, Leah, I guess we're in conclusion of this webinar on oral history ethics, community engagement, and essentials.
All right. Thank you so much, Randy. And thank you everyone for attending today.